I would say the biggest opportunity or the starting point is mindset. Because as I see it, the really fundamental or foundational change is a mindset away from a transactional sales-driven model to one of provisioning or to catering to a need, to bringing about a continuous value. And this is, I should stress in my work that this is a fairly big one. So really getting away from the thinking that we need to produce things, sell them. And this might sound like a small thing, but for a large organization typically that has learned over years or decades to work in a certain way, it's a very, very big change in organizational mindset. So I would say it starts with that, and that's why I see what I think of as progressive companies in the circular space having this mindset already. It's much easier to try things when it's not at odds with what exists. So I see this is the first opportunity to change the mindset, and that's not done like this. So that's a note. The second point I would like to make is just that this kind of we might think of it as the servitization of goods in a way. This is not new, of course. This is a pattern that we've seen played out in many other industries with many other types of durable goods. Did you move from selling something to maybe selling it with a service contract or with some kind of care attached to it, to selling it more widely? Why don't we look after it? Then you kind of just use it, and at the end of the day, you're into a fully metered version where you just pay for what you use. And the classical example is the aircraft engines. So as we can see a similar transformation in these patterns from other industries also. So there are things we can learn. This has been done before, which doesn't mean that it will happen here also, but just saying that it's not novel to fashion. But then if we look at like fashion specifically and what I see as the big opportunity, I see it as for brands and retailers alike to seek an ongoing relationship. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go all the way to a subscription model or a way of catering to a need on an ongoing basis. Many companies are very progressive with this. We might have the Swiss performance shoe company On with their Cyclone model, which is a subscription service. You might have Adidas made to be remade. Different ways of being relevant to the consumer while they are using the service. So I would say that's a big opportunity to seek ways to be relevant on an ongoing basis rather than between transactions. Because what I can see also that from the data, the wear data I have, I can see how frequently people buy things. And if you are relevant to a consumer every 3 or 4 years, it's difficult to build a meaningful relationship. But then if we look at the wardrobe data that I have, we could see like what in light of that, what opportunities might there be for fashion and retail companies? I would say the first thing is for this high-use items, which are roughly, depending on category, a bit different, but roughly 10%, which are items that tend to be used 50 times or more per year, meaning once a week on average. So these are like favorite items, really highly used items. What comes to mind is, of course, a kind of subscription model, and that's what some brands are experimenting with. So when there are like heavy use items, which are needed on a continuous basis, then to me the question is about, can the brand or some other provider provide that value in a better way than the consumer? It might be care, it might be repairs, it might be just like caring for the asset so that it performs well. So if that can be provided and catered for in a better way than the consumer might, then there's at least conceptually an opportunity to be meaningful in a win-win type of way. And then one thing to note also that this roughly 10% doesn't account for all the items that are perfect substitutes. So just a kind of technical note that I see a lot of wardrobes with, let's say, black undershirt 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like to 8. They are identical. So if you look at it at the item level, yeah, they get a certain amount of use. But if you look at the utility of a black undershirt, that's used almost daily sometimes. So if you can find those pockets where something is used really frequently, it can be a kind of identical asset again. But those, as I see it, would be natural for some kind of ongoing subscription model. Then if we look at these low use items again, which is roughly 30 to 50%, a bit depending on category, but those items tend to get 4 or less wears in a whole year. What seems to be an opportunity, at least in light of this data, would be to offer them with a rental model or some other more fluid model where this very infrequent use is catered to in another way than that you own it and it sits idling for long times and then it might be used again. So it might be a rental, it might be re-commerce or any other way of having a more fluid supply side, if you like. So rather than producing 100 identical assets and distributing them to be idling, to produce less but see that they circulate more. So whatever model that can provide that ongoing value, I would say that would make sense. And I would say in this case, it's more about increasing asset utilization, because from what I see, again, from nearly half of our wardrobes are heavily underutilized. So at least conceptually, there should be an opportunity to take these really often good goods and assets that never get a chance to show what they're like made of or made for, to give them a proper chance. We might have a winter jacket made for 400 wears or 1,000 wears, which would get 28 in the current way. So if we can somehow provide them in a different way, to me it's about asset utilization, and I see absolutely huge potential in the sitting asset stock that we have in a way. And then one thing to note about that, I think, is that when we look at models such as rental, we might actually look at the existing consumer behavior, because for a large share of our wardrobes, the garments we have end up being quite expensive actually in use. So if you take the idea of you have, let's say for durable goods again, so if you have jackets or shoes or outerwear, you might have a lot of items with cost per wear, so 20 to 30 euros. So if you think of that as the existing cost of these items to the consumers, and for good and bad, we don't think of it like that as consumers, it seems. But that gives a benchmark of the existing cost level with which it should be possible to provide these services. So at least theoretically, it should be the same if I rent a jacket whenever I need it for 30 euros, or if I own it, because that's the cost I'm already paying. So I'm not saying this is trivial, but I'm thinking that we are, as consumers, often already paying something, an amount that at least in my thinking seems to leave lots of room for the exchange mechanism to take place. So if you take an example of having an asset worth, let's say, 200 euros, so selling it once, or for instance renting it, and the existing consumer behavior is such that 20 euros is the kind of going price that we don't think of, but we are paying, then 10 rental times is the equivalent of selling it. And most jackets take a lot more use than 10. So to me, then it comes back to how efficiently can you provide the kind of exchange mechanism. And then one thing I have noted, and this is one thing that I'm really trying to look into now, is that how can we unlock, how can we make this happen? And one thing that to me seems to be a blocker or a constraint is the general consumer perception of something that has been used or that is not absolutely new. Because I can see an interesting pattern of new items and items that were acquired pre-used or pre-loved, and they get similar amounts of wear. So they're as durable from that perspective, but they tend to trade on different price points, significantly cheaper. Certainly there are items that maintain their value through use. They might be really durable. Of course, the brand has a big impact. Some brands really kind of keep their value, and some don't. There's large differences, of course. Some garments just don't take a lot of use, and that kind of makes sense in a way, because if they're only used 3 times, it doesn't really make sense to create them to take 30 or 50. But what I think, where I think lies an opportunity is in the kind of delta between what the technically durability value of an item is and what how the market values it. because I see this, I tend to see this difference between what it should be worth and what people think it's worth. And I think there's a kind of an obstacle to overcome. It's a kind of different way of thinking of things. And if we take analogies from other assets or other durable goods, such as tools, which we don't have perhaps such a sentimental attachment to necessarily, we don't really care if it's used or how it looks, if it works and it's not dirty. but there it might be different. But I'm thinking, how can we find ways for us to think about garments also more as assets that keep their value and keep their kind of utility over time, rather than consumables that once you purchase them, they become kind of worthless to anyone but you. And then maybe on a final note about opportunities for circularity, I would say that it would seem that now that we seem to have this stack of overcapacity in our wardrobes, so in the short term, there's a game of redistributing what we already have, and we see a lot of growth in peer-to-peer, resale platforms and so forth, which is like redistributing what we already have. But of course, that's something that kind of fixes itself in a way. So over time, I'm thinking that the end game lies more in a more kind of fluid catering to the needs of fashion than the model where we push things into the system and then we need to redistribute them. But rather going into a model, it might be rental or some other models, where we cater to the same demand for fashion with a more flexible supply side, rather than trying to change the demand side. So that's where I think that over time, the large potential for circularity in fashion especially is.